Put that down before you say something you cannot take back. You are here to fix a hinge on a jewelry box, not to tell my client what she owns. Don't touch that. I haven't finished cataloging. That is a Pemberton catch. Nobody else built a spring like that in 1925. Anyone can memorize a name out of a book. That does not give you the right to interfere in a client's private affairs. A book will not tell you the catch sticks on the third click every time. The man who built this made it slightly wrong on purpose, so nobody could copy it clean. Somebody taught me that with his own two hands, 30 years before you ever opened that tray. That does not excuse you inserting yourself where you were not invited. Read the catch before you read the mark. I am not inserting myself anywhere. I am telling the truth in front of the one person in this room who actually owns it. Careful. Men who go around accusing people tend to find themselves without work. So do men who accuse a repairman of lying and then get proven wrong in under a minute.
Cordelia Winthrop did not say a word. She stood by the window with both hands folded, watching a man who had managed her jewelry for 22 years get corrected by one who had been in her house for 11 minutes. None of us in that dining room knew it yet, but I had just spoken the one true sentence in the whole state of Georgia that Bertram Wexley could least afford to hear out loud. He was 3 signatures away from taking almost everything Cordelia Winthrop had left of her husband, and I was the only person standing in that room who could read a catch well enough to slow him down. To understand why a stuck spring mattered that much, you have to go back to the start of that same Tuesday, before any of it had a name yet. My name is Harmon Kellum. I am 39 years old. I fix washing machines, ice makers, garbage disposals, whatever a warranty sticker still covers in a house that keeps its paperwork in a kitchen drawer. I work out of a service van with my name stenciled on the door, out of Savannah, Georgia. It is steady work. It does not turn heads at a barbecue. It pays for a boy's shoes and a mortgage, and it lets me walk into somebody's kitchen most mornings and leave it working better than I found it. Most of my calls are simple. A dryer that stopped heating, a dishwasher that floods the kitchen floor every 3rd cycle. 2 days before Cordelia ever called my dispatcher, I spent an hour under a stranger's sink tracing a leak back to a washer the size of a dime, replaced it for $11, and left a woman thanking me like I had performed surgery. That is most of the job. Small problems, solved quietly, nobody impressed for long. What most of my customers never learn is that from 16 to 21, I swept the floor of a jewelry repair shop 3 blocks from where I live now, owned by a man named Aldous Penrose. Aldous had been a young goldsmith at the Pemberton Design House before it closed, back when a man named Nathaniel Pemberton still signed every catch himself. Aldous cared less about what a piece of jewelry looked like than about how it moved. Not the stamp, the mechanism, a catch, a hinge, a clasp. He said a mark could be bought by anyone with enough money and a bent conscience. A mechanism had to be built, one motion at a time, by a hand that either knew what it was doing or did not, and no amount of money could fake 20 years of practice. Read the catch before you read the mark, he told me once, setting down a brass clasp still warm from the polishing cloth. It took me 20 years to understand he had not only been talking about jewelry. The shop smelled like flux and hot metal, and, underneath both, that same faint orange sweetness from the wax tin he kept at his elbow. Aldous worked slowly on purpose. He used to say a fast hand and a careless hand looked identical from across the room, and only a slow one could prove which was which. I spent my first full year doing nothing but polishing settings and sorting screws, and I never once complained, because watching him work was its own kind of pay. I dropped nothing in 5 years at that bench. 5 years in, Aldous could hand me almost any old brooch or ring off the counter, and I could place it inside a 10-year window, guess whether the maker had been rushed finishing it, and usually tell whether the customer standing in front of us was repeating the truth or repeating a story somebody had once told them for a price. The shop closed the year I turned 21. Aldous got too old to run it alone, and I did not have the capital or the client list to run it without him. I found steady work fixing appliances instead. Aldous never once made me feel small for that choice. He told me a trade like his took 30 years to build trust wide enough to feed a family, and a young man with bills coming due did not have 30 years to spare waiting on strangers to trust him with their grandmother's rings. Otto is 9. He has a habit I used to find funny before I understood how much it actually told me about him. He rates things out loud on a scale of 1 to 10, completely unasked. Breakfast is a 7. A rainy Tuesday is a 3. A good joke, if it is really good, tops out around a 9, because he claims nothing has ever earned a 10 in his whole life. Not yet. The day his mother died, though he does not remember saying it, he told his grandmother the day was a 0, and he has never once used that number again since, for anything, no matter how bad the day gets. I think some part of him decided a 0 belonged only to her. Margot's mother watches him 2 afternoons a week while I finish late calls, and she is the one who told me about the 0. Months after it happened, sitting on my porch step with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she had let go cold. She said she almost corrected him that day, almost told him a 9-year-old should not be allowed to call his own mother's death a number at all. And then she decided a boy who needed a scale to survive something that size deserved to keep his scale, unedited, exactly as he built it. Last spring, he rated his own birthday party a 6 out loud, in front of 8 other 9-year-olds, and explained without embarrassment that the pizza arrived cold, and a 6 was still an honest number. Parents laughed. I did not. I have come to trust that boy's honesty more than almost anything else in my life, mostly because he has never once adjusted a number to spare somebody's feelings, mine included. Margot died 3 years ago, after a short illness that moved faster than any of the doctors expected it to. I do not talk about it much. Otto does not ask much. Some mornings that arrangement is easier than others, and some mornings it is not, and I have learned not to trust the mornings that feel easy too quickly. She used to sit at the kitchen table grading Otto's rating system the way a teacher grades homework, insisting a rainy Tuesday could not possibly be lower than a 4, arguing the point seriously until he laughed and revised it upward just to end the debate. I still hear her voice doing that sometimes, arguing a number back up. And some mornings I let myself believe I am hearing it correctly. Aldous died 6 years ago on a quiet Sunday afternoon, and left me one thing besides his tools. A small tin of polishing wax he mixed himself, beeswax and a little orange oil, the same tin he had used every working day of his life behind that bench. I keep it on a shelf by the back door now. Some nights, fixing a squeaky hinge on Otto's toy chest, or working the case off a broken watch a neighbor left with me, out of old habit, I open the tin just to smell it. It smells like the shop. It smells like being 20 and certain of something. When Aldous retired the shop for good, he gave his old training notebooks and a handful of surviving Pemberton House records he had kept from his apprentice years to the Savannah Historical Society. I remember him joking that a museum drawer was the only retirement plan a jewelry repairman could actually afford. I did not think about that donation again for 6 years. Not once. Not until it mattered more than almost anything else in this story. Cordelia Winthrop called my company on a Monday, asking for someone to look at an antique jewelry box with a jammed lid mechanism. My dispatcher does not usually send me for boxes like that. She sent me because Cordelia had specifically asked for someone who, in her exact words, actually knew old things. I did not think much of the request. Walking up to her door that Tuesday with a tool bag over one shoulder, sunlight cutting hard across her porch. The box turned out to be simple work. A swollen dovetail joint from a wet summer, 10 minutes once I had the back panel off. Cordelia stayed in the room the whole time, watching my hands the way some people watch a mechanic, waiting to be either impressed or quietly lied to. Her house smelled like lemon polish and old paper, the kind of house where every surface had been dusted for 60 years by somebody who cared exactly where each object sat. Most men just tell me it needs replacing, she said, watching me work the lid free. It saves them the trouble of fixing anything small. Small is usually the whole problem. Big is just small, ignored long enough. She almost smiled at that, the way people do when a stranger says something truer than they expected from a man carrying a tool bag. Bertram Wexley was already there when I arrived. A heavy-set man in his late 50s, with the kind of unhurried posture that comes from decades of never once being rushed by anybody in the room. He wore a pressed shirt with no tie, sleeves rolled with precision rather than heat, seated at Cordelia's dining table with a felt tray, a loop, and a leather ledger, cataloging pieces for what he called her annual insurance renewal. He had done it every year for 22 years, ever since not long after Walter Winthrop died. Cordelia introduced him as the only man in Savannah she trusted with her husband's jewelry, And Wexley accepted the introduction the way a man accepts weather, without any particular gratitude, as though trust were simply owed to him by now, interest included. It was Wexley who noticed me glance at the tray on my way toward the door, and Wexley who leveled that same warning at me, the one that opens this story, the way another man might level a finger. He expected silence, or an apology, or a quiet retreat toward my tool bag. He got a Pemberton catch, read out loud in front of a woman who had just watched her longtime jeweler accuse her handyman of something he had not actually done. He recovered fast, he always did. By the time I packed my tools, he had moved on to the pearls, telling Cordelia something about restringing costs, as though nothing at all had happened between us. I should have let it go there. Otto needed picking up from school. The van needed an oil change I kept postponing. A dozen good reasons to leave a stranger's jewelry alone sat waiting for me in the driveway that night, and not one of them managed to outweigh a single stuck click I could not stop turning over in my head. I did not. That night, lacing up the tool bag by the back door before bed, I opened Aldous' tin out of habit more than need. The smell put me right back in that shop, and it put a name in my head I had not thought about in years. Nathaniel Pemberton. Aldous used to say the man built a wrong click into every catch on purpose, so nobody could ever copy his work clean. The same way a good storyteller leaves one detail out on purpose, so only the true version can ever be complete. I had proven that click existed, live, in front of a woman I had met 11 minutes earlier. I wanted to know if I could prove it existed on paper too. I remembered the donation, Aldous' notebooks, and whatever surviving Pemberton records he had, sitting in a drawer at the Savannah Historical Society for 6 years, untouched by anyone who had a reason to look at them. I called 2 days later, on my lunch break, sitting in the van with a sandwich going soft on the dashboard, and asked a research librarian named Eudora Odom whether the Pemberton collection included any design records with serial numbers. She called back that Friday. It did. A leather-bound design ledger, water-damaged at the edges but legible, listing model numbers, dates, and short descriptions of the catch mechanism used on each commission piece, cross-referenced against the original client names who had paid for them. Model 411. Sold in 1925 to a family named Winthrop. That was the first thread, sitting quietly in a museum drawer the entire time, completely outside anything Bertram Wexley could reach or explain away, filed under a name that had nothing to do with him. I went back to Cordelia's the following week, this time on my own time, with a question I told myself was harmless curiosity. I asked if I could see the rest of the collection Wexley managed for her. She walked me through the dining room cabinet herself, pulling out a velvet tray of rings, and a smaller one holding 2 brooches instead of what should have been 3, based on a photograph hanging in her hallway that I had noticed on my way in that morning. There were 3, I said, looking between the photograph and the tray. Here, your husband, 40 years ago, standing by the dresser. 3 brooches behind him in a row. Cordelia looked at the photograph for a long moment, the way people look at something they have walked past 1,000 times without ever really seeing it clearly. The 3rd one went to a charity auction, she said slowly. Bertram arranged it 3 years back. He said it was the least valuable piece of the set. Costume work, mostly, he told me. He said keeping it insured would only cost more than it was worth selling. Do you have paperwork from that auction? A receipt? A lot number? Anything at all naming the buyer? She did not. Bertram had handled it directly, start to finish, the way he handled everything in that house. Bertram handled all of the arrangements himself, Cordelia said, setting the photograph frame back on the table. In 22 years, I do not believe I ever once saw a piece of paper leave this house that I had not signed sitting right at his elbow. I counted twice, standing in that dining room, matching the photograph against the tray sitting in front of me. 3 pieces down to 2, under the word charity, with absolutely nothing on paper anywhere in that house to say where the 3rd one had actually gone, or who had actually bought it, or for how much. Her composure held until I was nearly out the front door, and then it did not, and I let myself out quietly rather than make her stand there and pretend otherwise for my benefit. I kept most of my questions to myself that day, but I left that dining room certain that 1 brooch had already vanished from this house under a story nobody could verify, and with no way of knowing yet whether it was the only one. I drove to the Historical Society that Saturday, Otto in the back seat, rating the parking garage a 4 out of 10 for smell. Eudora Odom met us at the reading room door, a small woman with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair, moving with the brisk care of somebody who had spent a career convincing people that old paper deserved patience. Aldous used to bring me coffee every time he dropped off another box, she said, setting the ledger down on a foam cradle. He said a man who spends his whole life fixing broken things owes something to the people who keep the records of what things used to look like whole. I did not expect to ever open this particular ledger for a reason like yours. She had the ledger waiting on a reading table, gloves included, and let me photograph the page myself, careful not to touch the paper with bare hands, while Otto sat in the corner, rating the reading room a solid 8 for quiet. Beside the ledger sat 3 of Aldous' own training notebooks, spines cracked soft from handling, his young handwriting practicing the same catch diagrams over and over in the margins until they finally looked right. I had never seen his handwriting from that age before. It looked almost like mine did at 16, careful and a little too proud of itself. He kept copies of everything he learned there, Eudora said, watching me turn a page. Said a man ought to leave proof behind that he once knew how to do something honestly, in case anybody ever needed to check. Model 411, hand-engraved gold and diamond spray brooch. Signature catch. Sold March 1925 to the Winthrop family of Savannah. Underneath, in a different hand, someone had added a second entry decades later. Model 411 insurance survey requested 1980, catch mechanism confirmed intact and original. Walter Winthrop had commissioned an insurance survey the same year he gave the brooch to Cordelia. I had no idea yet whether that survey still existed anywhere she could reach, but the ledger proved one thing beyond argument. The brooch Bertram Wexley had called a likely copy in front of me was the same brooch a Pemberton employee had confirmed as original in writing, 45 years before Wexley ever opened a felt tray in that house. I drove home, turning numbers over in my head that made my stomach tighten. A signed Pemberton brooch from that period, with an intact original catch and a documented client history, did not sell for the kind of figure Wexley had likely quoted Cordelia for a piece of costume jewelry. It sold for a number with 2 commas in the wrong hands and considerably more than that in the right ones. If the missing third brooch had gone the same route as the pieces Wexley now called reproduction work, then charity auction was a polite word for something else entirely. I did not know yet how he was moving the real pieces once they left the house, or where the money actually landed once it cleared his ledger. I only knew that a woman who had trusted the same man with her husband's memory for 22 years was, at minimum, being quietly lied to about what she owned, and very possibly being robbed of the pieces themselves, one charity auction at a time. That night, I told Otto, in the vaguest terms a 9-year-old could stand to hear, that I might have found something that was not right at Mrs. Winthrop's house. "Is it bad?" he asked, not looking up from his cereal. "I think somebody has been lying to her for a long time." Otto considered this, the way he considered everything. Seriously, like a small judge weighing evidence nobody else in the room could see yet. "That's a 0, he said. "Lying to old ladies is a 0. Maybe lower, if there was a 0 lower than 0. I laughed for the first time in days, and then I stopped laughing, because I understood, sitting at that kitchen table, that soon I was going to have to stand between Cordelia Winthrop and a man I still did not fully understand, and I had no idea yet what he was capable of once he realized I was standing there at all. I tracked down Ida Wallace through a second-hand jewelry forum of all places, a former bookkeeper who had run the front counter at Wexley Fine Jewelry Appraisals for 6 years, before leaving without notice 8 months earlier. She picked the place herself, a diner near the farmer's market, and was already settled into a back booth by the time I walked in, a legal pad open in front of her like she had come prepared to give a deposition rather than have a conversation. "You want to know why I left?" It was not a question. Bertram photographs every single piece that comes through his door. Every ring, every brooch, dated and time-stamped and filed under the client's name, because his insurance carrier requires it for anything he holds in trust. That part is not a secret. Anybody could tell you that much. Do those photographs still exist somewhere? I never touched a single one after I walked out, but I know exactly how his system is built, drawer by drawer, and I would bet a year's pay that a subpoena finds every image intact. She tapped the pad once with her pen. Here is the part that actually cost me sleep. Bertram does not only repair pieces. He buys estate jewelry outright sometimes and resells it, and the state requires anybody doing that to file a report with local police, same as a pawnbroker would. Item description, date, names on both sides of the sale. I filed a stack of those reports myself, more weeks than not. What happens when the description on a police report does not match what actually sold? Then a man has written his own confession and mailed it to the one office guaranteed to keep it on file for years. Ida finally set the pen down. I am telling you this because Cordelia Winthrop sent my mother a sympathy card the year my father passed, a woman she had met exactly once. And I have carried that small kindness around long enough to want to finally do something with it. 2 threads, sitting exactly where the law required them to sit, filed under rules Bertram Wexley had followed for decades without ever once imagining a stranger would think to ask for copies. Before any of that, I spent an evening doing what I told myself was simple homework, searching Wexley's name and his shop online, reading through 20 years of reviews from satisfied clients who called him a gentleman, a family friend, the only appraiser in Savannah they trusted with anything that mattered. A few older posts, buried past the first page, told a different story in careful, hedged language. One woman wrote that she wished she had gotten a second opinion before letting a family ring go to auction. Nobody had ever pressed her on what she meant. Nobody had ever needed to. I made a mistake 2 days later that cost more than I expected it would. I sent Wexley a text message, meaning to sound casual, asking whether he had ever come across the term Pemberton catch in his appraisal work, and mentioning, carelessly, that I had turned up some interesting old paperwork on the subject. I typed it twice, deleted the second version, and sent the first one anyway, telling myself curiosity never hurt anybody. I meant it as a probe, a small test to see how he would react. He read it the way a jeweler reads a fresh scratch on a caseback, proof that somebody had already been inside. He called Cordelia the next morning, first thing, before she had even finished her coffee. He told her a private collector had surfaced overnight, eager to acquire the whole remaining grouping together, and that opportunities like that vanished within hours if a seller hesitated even slightly. He sat with her at her own kitchen table that same afternoon, papers already printed, already tabbed for her signature, and by the time he left, she had signed away a matching pair of Pemberton earrings, the last pieces of the set besides the brooch itself. The earrings left the house within 3 days, carried out by a courier Cordelia never met and could not later describe. I had handed him a warning without meaning to, and he had used it to move faster than I ever expected a man his age to move. Cordelia called me herself that Thursday, her voice thinner than I had heard it before. He said it was a wonderful opportunity, she told me. He said collectors like that do not come along twice in a lifetime. I signed before I even thought to call you. I should have called you first. Cordelia, there is no rush that benign, not for pieces that have sat safely in your family for 100 years already. I understand that now. The silence after that told me more than the sentence itself ever could. I have trusted that man since the week of Walter's funeral, Harmon. It did not once occur to me to doubt an emergency. Can you get the earrings back? He said the collector prefers privacy. He said pushing might insult a very generous man. She laughed, short and without any humor in it at all. I believed that sentence completely 24 hours ago. Now I cannot understand how I ever did. We will get them back. It might take longer than either of us wants. I am 76 years old, Harmon. I have very little patience left for the things that take longer than I want them to. But I have decided I would rather be patient and right than quick and robbed again. I sat in my van outside her house a long time that evening, angrier at myself than at him. 22 years of careful reputation did not crack because of one text message. It cracked because I had shown him exactly how much I already knew. And men who have spent decades managing what other people believe do not wait around to find out how much more a stranger might learn next. If I wanted to stop the rest of the collection from disappearing the same way, whatever I brought back to that house next had to be strong enough to survive a room full of his calm denials, and I needed it before the brooch itself found its own convenient buyer. I laid everything out to my kitchen table that weekend, once Otto was asleep. The museum ledger photograph, Ida's description of the intake photos, the shape of the police reporting law she had described from memory. 3 separate threads, none of them touching the others, none of them anywhere Wexley could reach to erase them all at once. Aldous used to say, a good repair never depended on a single point holding. 3 weak points, tied correctly, outlasted one strong one every time. The night before Cordelia's meeting, I took Aldous' tin down from the shelf one more time, working a soft cloth into the wax the way he had shown me 30 years earlier. I had asked to see the brooch one final time that week, and Cordelia had let me sit with it alone at her kitchen table for 20 minutes. I worked the wax gently into the catch, clearing decades of dust and old polish from the seam, until the mechanism ran clean under my thumb. Click, click, stick, exactly the way it should. Whatever happened tomorrow, I wanted to walk in already certain of the one thing nobody in that room could argue with me about. Cordelia set the confrontation herself. The way I came to learn, she preferred to do most things once she finally decided to act. She invited Bertram to the house to discuss insurance figures for what remained of the collection, and asked me to be there as well, along with an investigator named Louise Tarrant from the state's second-hand dealer licensing division, the same office that had been quietly receiving Wexley's own transaction reports for years without anyone thinking to read them twice. Cordelia had the room arranged before he arrived, chairs set deliberately around the dining table. Nothing from the collection anywhere near it. She poured nothing. When I asked her, near the stove, whether she wanted me to bring out cups, she shook her head once. "A guest gets tea," she said. "An auditor gets a chair." Bertram arrived composed, felt tray under one arm, the same unhurried confidence he had worn every single time I had seen him. His leather folder, when he finally set it down, already had 3 pages tabbed for signature inside it. The annual renewal, a consignment release for the brooch itself, and an estate authorization broad enough to cover anything else Cordelia still owned. 3 signatures. He had walked in that afternoon, fully prepared to leave with exactly what his very first sentence to me had implied he was owed. He opened by suggesting, gently, that the entire meeting had been engineered by a repairman with something to prove and very little to lose. "I understand the appeal of playing detective," he said, addressing Cordelia directly, his voice as smooth as it had ever been. "But I have earned 22 years of your confidence. This man has earned a handful of weeks. Weigh that honestly before you decide whose word carries further in this room." "That is an interesting argument," Louise Tarrant said, opening a folder she had carried in under one arm. "Here's mine." A Pemberton design ledger, sitting at the Savannah Historical Society, names this exact brooch by model number in 1925, decades before Mr. Kellum ever laid eyes on it. Your own insurer required you to date and photograph every piece you took in, which puts this brooch and a matching pair of earrings in your hands during the precise weeks they went missing from this house. And a transaction report bearing your own signature, filed with the city police, calls a genuine Pemberton original an unsigned reproduction. None of that came from him. All of it came from paperwork you generated yourself. For a moment, Bertram said nothing at all, staring down into his own felt tray like the pearls might hand him a way out of this, if he stared at them long enough. "Paperwork gets sloppy," he said finally. "A repairman with a grudge could have coached a records clerk into finding whatever description he wanted to hear. For all anyone in this room actually knows, he altered the catch himself before that first appointment, just to manufacture a discovery worth bragging about." "I have never touched that brooch outside this room," I said. "So you say." "So the ledger says. The catch was recorded intact in 1925 and confirmed intact again in 1980, before I was even born. Records can be misread. Old ink fades with time. A man eager to look clever can read whatever he wants into a smudge on old paper." For one long moment I watched doubt move across Cordelia's face, and my stomach dropped, because Bertram Wexley was doing exactly what he had spent 22 years learning how to do, talking his way out of a room that should have already closed on him. 22 years, he said, softer now, almost wounded. "I sat with you the week Walter died, Cordelia. I have never once given you a reason to doubt me before this man walked into your house with a tool bag and a theory." "He has never asked me for anything," Cordelia said slowly, as though the thought were arriving for the first time, even as she spoke it. "You have asked me to sign something almost every year for 2 decades. Cordelia stood up. "I would like everyone to wait here," she said, and walked out of the room before anybody could answer her. She came back 5 minutes later, carrying a small metal box none of us had ever seen, the kind people keep behind a false panel or bolted flat to a closet floor. She set it on the table and opened it with a key she wore on a chain under her blouse. One none of us had known existed until that exact moment. Inside was a single folded document, an insurance survey Walter Winthrop had commissioned in 1980, the same year he gave her the brooch, describing the piece in his own handwriting as verified original. Signature catch intact. Pemberton house mark confirmed by an outside appraiser. My husband put this in a safe deposit box the year he gave me this brooch, Cordelia said, because he did not trust banks to keep good records forever. And apparently, he was right not to trust jewelers either. She turned to Bertram. You have managed my jewelry for 22 years, and you never once knew this existed, because you never once thought to ask what my husband actually left me. You assumed an old woman would not think to check her own safe. She picked up the house phone from the side table and dialed a number she had clearly written down before any of us arrived that afternoon. Eudora, it is Cordelia Winthrop, she said once the call connected. Would you read me that ledger entry again? Model 411. Yes, I will wait. She held the receiver out so the whole room could hear the description read back, word for word, matching the brooch sitting inside Bertram Wexley's own felt tray. She set the phone down. Harmon does not need to say another word on my behalf, she said. My own husband's handwriting from 1980 outranks you. A museum ledger that predates our friendship outranks you. Your own dated photographs, proving exactly which weeks my earrings sat in your shop before they disappeared, outrank you. And your own signature on a police report, calling this brooch a reproduction the same year you quietly sold my earrings to a stranger for a sum I will never even be told, outranks you most of all. Cordelia, please, let us discuss this privately. Privately? Cordelia repeated the word slowly, like a term from a language she had decided to stop speaking. Privately is exactly where you did all of this, Bertram. I would like a room full of witnesses for whatever comes next. Bertram did not answer that. He gathered his felt tray with both hands, muttered something about calling his attorney before the end of the day, and walked out through Cordelia's front hallway fast enough that his shoes never once landed flat against the floor. Bertram Wexley did not simply disappear after that afternoon. Men who have spent 22 years being trusted do not let go easily, even after the room has already decided against them for good. He found Otto 3 days later at the hardware store 2 blocks from our house, where I sometimes let him wander the paint aisle while I picked up parts for a customer's dryer. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The store nearly empty, fluorescent light humming over rows of paint chips fanned out in cardboard racks. I was at the counter, 30 feet away, describing a broken belt to the clerk. I did not see the man walk in. I did not see him find Otto crouched by the bottom rack, sorting chips by color, the way he liked to do while he waited. Otto told me about it in the truck afterward, in a voice flatter than I liked hearing from him, staring straight ahead through the windshield instead of at me. There was a man by the paint chips, he said. Older than you. Nice coat. He crouched down next to me like we were friends already. Otto held up an imaginary card between 2 fingers, the way the man must have held the real one. He picked up a chip, this blue one, and he said that shade there, I would call that a 4 out of 10, wouldn't you, Otto? Just like that. Not loud, like he already knew the game we play, like he already knew my name before I ever said it. My hands went cold on the wheel. I made myself keep them at 10 and 2. What did you say? Nothing. I didn't say anything at all. He smiled and stood back up and walked out the front door before I even figured out what to say back to him. Otto turned to look at me for the first time since getting in the truck. How did he know my name, Dad? I never met him before in my whole life. Not once. The van with my name stenciled on the door had sat outside Cordelia's house 4 separate times that month, in plain view of her street and everyone on it. A man who reads hallmarks for a living reads a painted door in a single pass, and a boy who rates parking garages out loud, unprompted, to anyone standing near him, hands a stranger the rest of the details for free. I did not have an answer that would not frighten him, worse than the truth already had. So I told him the truth in the smallest pieces I could manage, that a man I was helping Mrs. Winthrop deal with had chosen a strange way to show he was still angry, and that it would not happen again. I did not raise my voice, though I wanted to. I called Louise Tarrant that night instead, and told her exactly what had happened, word for word, the way Otto had told it to me. That is not evidence of a crime, she said. It is evidence of a man who has run out of better ideas. I want you to know that matters to this board, even if it never goes in a filing anywhere. She paused. For what it is worth, men in his position rarely approach a child unless they have already decided somewhere in their own head that the fight is lost. It is a small, ugly kind of surrender. I have seen it before, and it tells me we are closer to the end of this than you might think tonight. I did not find much comfort in that at the time. sitting in my kitchen with Otto already asleep down the hall. But I have come to believe she was right. The state board overseeing second-hand jewelry dealers suspended Bertram Wexley's license within the week, pending a formal review of every transaction report he had filed over the past decade, not only the ones touching Cordelia's collection. The review took months, longer than any of us expected, moving at the particular pace of an institution that answers to nobody's calendar but its own. 2 more elderly clients came forward once word finally got around town, each with a version of the same story, a trusted piece quietly declared worthless, quietly sold for a great deal more somewhere else entirely. Neither of them had kept a photograph on a hallway wall to count pieces against. Neither of them had a man like Aldous Penrose to teach a stranger how to read a catch. They had only Wexley's own word, for years, which was exactly the point. Lawyers negotiated a settlement over the following month that made Cordelia whole for the gap between what Wexley had told her the earrings were worth and what he had actually pocketed selling them. Nobody put handcuffs on Bertram Wexley. What actually happened to him was slower and, I think, harder to live inside. A man who had spent 2 decades being the first phone call every worried family made now had to sit in a review hearing and explain, line by line, why his own handwriting kept contradicting his own story. The buyer, who had taken the earrings in good faith, handed them back the moment Louise showed him the paperwork, glad to settle for a partial refund rather than have his own name dragged through a stolen property case over jewelry he had never suspected was stolen at all. I never told Cordelia that the earrings only left the house because of a text message I sent, trying to sound clever. I suspect Ida Wallace figured it out on her own, from the timeline alone, and simply chose never to say it out loud in front of me. Ida testified formally once the board review opened, the only former employee willing to put her name on a statement instead of a rumor. She found work within the month at a competing jeweler 2 streets over, one who framed her hiring publicly and a little shamelessly as a statement about what kind of shop he intended to run. She sends Cordelia a Christmas card every year now, she told me once, though the 2 of them had barely spoken while Ida worked the counter that used to belong to the man who wronged them both. Cordelia invited us to tea on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after Bertram Wexley's name stopped appearing anywhere near her house. She had the brooch back from an independent appraiser by then, cleaned, the catch tested a dozen times over, each click landing exactly where a 99-year-old wrong-on-purpose spring was built to land. She pinned it to her cardigan herself, standing in front of the hallway mirror, Otto watching from the doorway with the particular seriousness he brought to anything he considered worth rating later. "Do you remember what he actually said to you that very first afternoon?" Cordelia asked, once we were seated with tea poured. "Put that down before you say something you cannot take back," as though you were the dangerous one in my dining room. He was not entirely wrong. I did say something I could not take back. I just did not say the thing he was afraid of hearing until months later. Most men accused that plainly would have gone quiet and finished the repair and left. I have watched you closely enough these last months to know you were never going to be one of them. I would still like to give you something from this house, if you will let me. Not the brooch, never the brooch. But there is a small tie pin tucked away upstairs, plain silver, no stones, a piece so modest nobody has thought to appraise it in decades. I would like Otto to have something signed by a man who built things honestly, even the small things nobody ever bothers to steal. Otto rated the tie pin an 8 before he had even opened the small velvet box it came in, on principle, and then revised it to a 9 once he actually saw it, plain silver catching the afternoon light through Cordelia's front window. I did not correct her generosity. Some gifts are not really about the object at all, and I have stopped arguing with the ones that clearly are not. That evening, at home, I took Aldous' tin down from the shelf by the back door for the first time, with Otto watching instead of alone. I opened it. The smell filled the kitchen the way it always did, beeswax and orange oil, 30 years of a man's steady hands folded into one small container. "This was my teacher's," I told him. "He gave it to me the year he died. I think it is time you had it." Otto took the tin in both hands, careful the way he was careful with very few things. "Read the catch before you read the mark," I told him. The exact words Aldous once set down in front of me, along with that same warm clasp. That is not only about jewelry, Otto. That is about people, too. Watch what somebody does before you believe what they tell you about themselves. He opened the lid himself, slowly. the way I had shown him to open anything old and worth respecting, and breathed in once before he said a word. "It smells like your shop stories," he said. "It smells like a man who never once cut a corner in his whole life." He turned the tin over once, checking it the way I had taught him to check everything now, and set it gently on the table between us. 10 out of 10, he said quietly, and for the first time in 3 years, the scale had finally found its 10. I did not argue the number. Neither, I think, would his mother have. Some truths do not need a signature to be real. They only need somebody willing to test the catch, click by click, until it finally tells you what it has always known, patiently, the same way a good mechanism always has, long after everyone in the room has stopped asking it to.